Good evening and welcome to the public meeting for the draft for Grimsby Beach Secondary Plan, which would be official plan amendment number 11 and the supporting zoning bylaw amendment. Before we begin, I will read the land acknowledgement statement. Niagara Region and Grimsby are situated on treaty land. This land is steeped in the rich history of the First Nations, such as the Hattaway-Wendoronk, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. There are many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people from across Turtle Island that live and work in Niagara today. The regional municipality of Niagara and the town of Grimsby stands with all Indigenous peoples, past and present, in promoting the wise stewardship of the lands on which we live. The premise of this public meeting is to provide the opportunity for the public to provide input on the draft documents. I would like to stress that there have been no decisions or recommendations made by council or planning staff on these drafts. A webinar was held on the draft materials on October 26th, and an open house workshop was held on December 2nd last year. The version at the public meeting has incorporated feedback and suggestions from those events. This meeting is conducted in accordance with town's procedural bylaw. All participants are asked to conduct themselves with decorum and respect and provide the opportunity for all members of the public to express their opinion in an environment of tolerance on all points of view and free of intimidation. The intent is to create a venue to encourage people to participate in the process and provide their input. If a person or public body would otherwise have an ability to appeal the decision of the Council of the Town of Grimsby to the Ontario Land Tribunal, but the person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the Town of Grimsby before the proposed official plan and zoning bylaw amendments are adopted, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision. If a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the Town of Grimsby before the proposed official plan and zoning bylaw amendments are adopted, the person or public body may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the Ontario Land Tribunal, unless, in the opinion of the tribunal, there are reasonable grounds to add the person or public body as a party. With us this evening is the lead consultant for the project, Dana Anderson, as well as Nicole Mastracciano, both from MHBC. Planning staff and attendance is Terry Donaya Edwards, Senior Planner, Bianca Vicaria, Heritage Planner, and Walter Basic, Assistant Director of Planning. Tonight, we will start with the staff providing a brief presentation outlining the process. Next, the consultant team will provide an overview of the draft documents, and that will be followed by an opportunity for you to ask questions. As we navigate the virtual public meeting, we asked all participants for your patience. Each participant will be called in order and will be provided 10 minutes to speak. Each presenter may speak only once. If you hear your comment presented by someone else, please do not duplicate the remarks. All of the comments are being recorded and will be taken into consideration. When you are called, we ask that you state your name and address. Persons addressing council should confine their remarks to the business at hand and shall direct their comments or questions to the chair. Staff are taking notes of all the questions asked this evening. At the end of the delegations, the consultant will be asked to respond to all of the questions and comments raised. If you feel that your questions have not been responded to this evening, you can email our planning department at planning@grimsby.ca. Good evening, Terry. Now you'll do your presentation. Welcome.
Good evening. Thank you. Peter, do you want to bring that up, please? Great. Thank you. So tonight we are going to be talking about the draft Grimsby Beach Secondary Plan, which is called OPA 11, and the implementing zoning bylaw amendment. So welcome and thank you for joining us this evening. Next slide, please. So first for the agenda, we're going to go through this planning department presentation. The consultant will do their presentation, and then we'll have the questions and comments from and delegations. Next slide, please. So the purpose of tonight's meeting, as the mayor suggested, is to provide an overview of the planning process and how you can get involved, provide an overview of the policy and regulatory framework and the rules and regulations that are in place, provide details on the comments that have been received on the proposal that's so far, and we'll provide information on the details regarding the proposal and answer some questions and listen to your feedback. Next slide, please. So why is the change proposed? So council determined that a land use study was to be undertaken for Grimsby Beach, and council implemented an interim control bylaw for the area that was subsequently extended, and that it was expiring on May 9th of 2022. The proposed secondary plan and implementing zoning are a result of the land use study and fulfill the requirement of the interim control bylaw. The official plan and zoning bylaws may only be amended if it is determined that proposed changes comply with the overall intent of the official plan, the Grimsby official plan, and result in development that is compatible with the surrounding neighborhoods. Next slide. So here's the diagram of the planning, the process. So the first stage was the land use study, then some public and technical reviews of the drafts. And as the mayor mentioned, in October and December, there was an information webinar and open house workshop. And so the documents were then revised. And now here we are at the green, bullet that says statutory public meeting. Following this, there will be additional analysis and revisions to the document, and that will all be featured into the staff recommendation report, including all of the comments received up to today, as well as through February 7th when we've requested comments. And then it will go for a council decision. Next slide, please. So we're asking for comments from everyone. So just tell the town what you think, provide the comments to the planning department at the email address right there, planning@grimsby.ca. And we're asking that you do so by February 7th, so we can make sure we include all of your comments and consider them fully. And if you choose, you can send a copy of your email to your ward councillor as well. Next slide, please. So there's an opportunity to stay informed. The Let's Talk Grimsby page, our town website, we continue to put up materials on there if you wanted to follow along. Please provide your mailing address to the planning department. And then you can get further updates on the project, notice of any future meetings, including the recommendation, when the recommendation report comes forward to committee and council, information on how to obtain a staff report, information on speaking in front of the committee, and how the appeal component for it. Next slide, please. So really the official plan, currently the area is recognized, Grimsby Beach is recognized in Schedule D. You can see the map right in the bottom left-hand corner there, the blue area. And there are also 4 references to Grimsby Beach. 3 of them are including a reference to potential future guidelines that should be prepared for the area. And 1 notes a special character, that Grimsby Beach has a special character. So the amendment proposed of this evening, it expands the Grimsby Beach area. So it will actually go down. And that was based on feedback that was received, and Dana will provide more information about all of that later. It creates a secondary plan for the area, including introduction of character areas. Next slide, please. And the zoning bylaw, the currently in the zoning bylaw, it has a Grimsby Beach zone, which is known as GB. And the proposed zoning would, in addition, provide a Grimsby Beach 1 zone, so GB1, in the south and northwest character areas, including zoning, land uses and parameters, such as a minimum yard setback. It would also add a maximum lot coverage for vacant lots within the Grimsby Beach zone. Next slide, please. I think that's actually the conclusion. So with that, I'll try and turn it over to Dana. Peter, can you bring up her presentation deck, please? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Terry, and thank you, Mayor Jordan, for the introduction. I'm hoping everyone can hear me. Perfect. So good evening, and again, thank you. For the record, my name is Dana Anderson. I am a planner and a partner with MHBC Planning, and am also the planning consultant, along with my colleague Nicole this evening, who will be presenting an overview of the Grimsby Beach Secondary Plan and implementing zoning bylaw amendment. And our team, which consists of MHBC Planning, Urban Design and Heritage, have been engaged with Crozier Engineering and Tarandis Associates Limited, as well as Shore Plan, with the town throughout the Grimsby Beach land use study, which has now resulted in the recommended secondary plan and implementing zoning bylaw amendment. If I can have the next slide. In terms of my presentation this evening, a lot of the information, and some of it has just been summarized by Terry, is found in the staff report. So I will try and be more concise as it relates to some of the key information, key policies and provisions that are being recommended. But in terms of a high-level overview to provide context in terms of the study itself, I wanted to highlight the study purpose and some of the background and where we're at in the overall study process. Importantly, speak to what we have heard and how it to date has been addressed through revisions and changes. And then finally, an overview of the secondary plan, as was referenced as Official Plan Amendment 11 and the proposed zoning bylaw amendment, and also speak to some of the other supporting and implementing documents that are part of the study, but not specific to this statutory public meeting this evening, but certainly important elements that are integrated as part of the overall study. And then finally, just a brief discussion of next steps. The next slide, please. So as Terry mentioned, the Grimsby Beach area has been identified and is identified in the current official plan. And the study of the area was initiated to address land use planning in the Grimsby Beach area. And that was as a result of an interim control bylaw passed by council. And the purpose of the study was to assess the current policies and regulations and the framework within which Grimsby Beach is currently planned. And also to look at it in the context of the area, as we know it has uniqueness, key characteristics, as well as a number of concerns and issues that have been raised by the community. And through this study to develop an updated land use planning framework within which the area would be placed going forward. And as a result of some of the initial discussions that occurred with the study area itself did change somewhat, and this was in response to comments and input from the community. And as Terry mentioned, the area to the south was expanded to include much of the lot fabric in the south area, including some of the significant tree areas. And additional lots were added on the east side of Park Road North to be integrated as part of the area to be studied. The next slide, please. So again, this chart outlines the study process and gives you an idea of that the process has involved a number of phases, resulting in the various draft documents and reports that have come forward at different stages. Without going into a lot of detail, I can summarize that the initial stage really involved information gathering and collecting information through both some of the existing policy documents, past studies, research and analysis, and certainly key engagement opportunities with the community, which I'll speak to in a moment. And that resulted in a background report that summarized some of the key findings and issues from that research analysis and public engagement. And in the second phase of the study, this was an opportunity to work with the community to develop a vision for the area that could be reflected in a goal and set of objectives very specific to Grimsby Beach. And also to identify the different approaches and to consider those approaches as to how some of the key findings, issues could be addressed and how to best implement the vision, the goals and objectives for the area. And in phases 3 and 4, Through that assessment of the approaches, the development of a secondary plan was determined to be one of the first comprehensive approaches to be considered. And so the draft of that framework, as well as the implementing zoning bylaw, was prepared, as well as a number of additional documents that I'll speak to that provide guidance in terms of implementation of the policies and regulations for Grimsby Beach. And the star, of course, represents where we're at in the overall process, being the statutory public meeting this evening, with the final phase being the consideration of the final secondary plan and zoning by council at a later meeting and additional community consultation. The next slide, please. In terms of community engagement and input, as I noted, that each phase has involved significant community engagement and input through a number of means. That has included ongoing opportunities, as are listed here, also through the Grimsby Beach study page, which is on the Let's Talk Grimsby Beach platform. And so throughout the study, there have also been some key opportunities and milestones where there have been workshops, webinars, and open houses and public meetings to specifically address and listen to the community and obtain their input. In addition to this, there was a stakeholder advisory committee, or what's been referred to as an SAC, that was an integral part of the process. And I did want to take the opportunity at this point to thank those members of the Stakeholder Advisory Committee, which includes several members of the community who provided valuable information as we walked through the process, and also were very important to how we framed and developed the policies. Each phase was also engaged with a technical advisory committee, and so those were members of various town departments and staff from the region and the Conservation Authority. And a very detailed list of all of the public engagement activities, I believe, is attached to the planning report as an appendix. So you can see the extent of the different communications and the feedback that's been received. Next slide, please. So it's been through that process that we have, through the engagement, that we have received input on many issues. Many ideas have been presented and many areas. And you can see here that all of those have fed into the development of the draft secondary plan and the zoning bylaw. And I would like to state that many of the items that are noted here, and I won't go through them in detail, but a lot of them have resulted in direct new policies, as well as zoning provisions and implementation documents. And it's through the submissions that there have been many revisions and changes to those particular areas that have informed the draft secondary plan. There are some others that will continue to be addressed, and that's through other work that is directed through the policies, but that will include items that will help implement the vision, the objectives, and the policies of the plan. And one example of that is the Urban Design and Cultural Heritage Guidelines. And this is an area where additional guidelines are to be provided that will reflect how and the direction for how change can occur within the Grimsby Beach secondary plan area. And we know that in that document, there's also been ongoing discussions and revisions to reflect that in addition to the rich cultural heritage and the built heritage in the area and the cultural heritage landscapes, there are also very unique creative design elements that should be considered and should be encouraged as part of celebrating this incredible area. And finally, there are some areas that I would refer to are certainly concerns that have been raised by the community, but relate to operational matters that are somewhat outside of the scope of what can be addressed in a secondary plan. And I believe this is addressed in some detail in the staff report. And these are certainly important, and we have identified them, and staff have noted that they do relate to ongoing programs by the town, and they will look to implement some changes as it relates to one area in particular is parking and another relates to some of the feedback as it relates to the public realm and additional study that is required. And I'll speak to that in a moment. The next slide, please. And I should just state in relation to those areas of input and the concerns, the staff report also goes through and identifies by topic many of the comments and how they have been responded to date. The completed work in phase 4 has really resulted in the draft secondary plan and the zoning bylaw that was noted. But it was the result of a summary of all of the work in a planning report that then also informed those 2 documents. And so this slide is intended to show the integration of that planning report and its recommendations into the proposed secondary plan and zoning that's before you, and then the ongoing implementation of those documents through some additional key studies and strategies. And those are listed here as the tree strategy, the urban design and heritage guidelines, the infrastructure plan, fiscal impact assessment, and then a number of other studies and works that will provide ongoing implementation of the directions in the new policies. So just in terms of the planning report, this had provided an overview of the various approaches that were considered, the recommendations and the results of that work. And it also went on to suggest additional areas of work and pieces of work that need to be continued. And that includes some reference to some of the stormwater management issues, some additional signage and consideration for additional work related to parking, and also the development of a public realm master plan for the area. And then, as noted, the key focus for this evening is the draft secondary plan and zoning bylaw amendment, and that is subject to a process under the Planning Act. And that is something that is being undertaken prior to the interim control bylaw, which will expire, I believe, in May of this year. In terms of those supporting documents, again, I will speak to those just at the end of the presentation in terms of the urban design and heritage guidelines. But in terms of the tree strategy, this is a strategy that identifies the uniqueness and importance of trees in the area. It provides it reflects the information from the inventories that were undertaken, both as part of our consulting work and some of the great work from members of the community. And it sets out how trees, both protection and the enhancement of the tree canopy, are to be provided through the policies and guidelines, and more importantly, sets out some key strategies for tree protection and management in terms of replacement trees, plantings, diversity of trees, and other elements and details related to the protection and the enhancement of the tree canopy. In terms of the draft infrastructure plan, this is in essence a reflection of the existing servicing and identifies some areas of improvements as a result of the assessment in the area. And this relates to both water and sanitary sewer servicing. The next slide, please. So now I'd like to turn to the focus of the draft secondary plan. And I think what is a secondary plan is one of the key questions that was raised early in the process and that we've continued to address. And really a secondary plan is a land use planning framework, and it's intended to provide direction for land use policies for a particular area. And as is indicated in the staff report, in many ways, secondary plans are utilized to provide more detailed policies and directions for areas that may be subject to additional growth or areas where additional growth is directed. And we often refer to these as intensification areas or strategic growth areas. But also secondary plans are developed for more mature, established areas and character areas. And that's certainly the case with Grimsby Beach. In terms of the land use policy approaches and whether or not to utilize a secondary plan, this was something that was considered through the land use study process, and various approaches were looked at, including just an addition to the existing policies within the parent official plan, providing some additional character policies. But it was seen that a comprehensive approach to address not only land use policies, but to define the character and provide for character areas within Grimsby Beach with additional implementation was seen as the most appropriate way in which to ensure that managing change in Grimsby Beach was done in relation to its existing characteristics and the importance of those characteristics, including cultural heritage resources. And so the Grimsby Beach secondary plan is to be implemented through an amendment to the parent plan. And it will be reflected through a series of maps or schedules that will identify the area, that identify the character areas, that also reflect the land uses, and I'll speak to those in a moment, and also introduce the importance of views and corridors within the area. The policies themselves, in addition to land use, also have a number of general policies that speak to things like servicing and transportation, urban design, cultural heritage, which I'll speak to, and also implementation. And most importantly, these new policies specifically recognize the importance of the existing built form and cultural heritage and natural heritage of the area, and maintaining and protecting that as part of the policy framework. I would also note that all of the work in this draft secondary plan as it's presented is required to conform to the growth plan of the province and the provincial policy statement. And that's important because in those provincial documents, the official plan is one of the most important ways in which to implement directions from those documents. And as I mentioned, that includes a reflection of local character and its importance, and a reflection of the importance of protecting those areas. The next slide, please. So through the visioning process with the community, a goal for the secondary plan was established, and that is to guide change that maintains and enhances the unique character of the area while protecting and conserving the natural and cultural heritage features and existing built form of the area, including the shoreline, trees, open spaces, and parks. And then a series of objectives were provided, under which are a number of ways in which those objectives are to be met. And these are set out in the introduction of the secondary plan. And they build on the goal and include maintaining and conserving the character of Grimsby Beach, its uniqueness, protecting the shoreline, natural and environmental features, protecting and replenishing trees and canopy cover, maintaining and enhancing parks, open space areas and connections, and finally identifying and conserving significant cultural heritage resources. The next slide, please. So one of the key components of the secondary plan is to reflect what the land use designations are for the Grimsby Beach area. And these are predominantly unchanged from the land use policies in the existing official plan. And so they have been carried forward into a map for the Grimsby Beach area as part of the secondary plan as a land use plan schedule. And so those include maintaining the low density residential areas within the plan, reflecting the existing parks and open space areas and providing policies for those, ensuring that the environmental areas that are identified through the environmental protection and environmental conservation designations are maintained and protected, and that the hazard land areas are maintained and protected as they're reflected in the current plan. And finally, that the small portion you'll see on the south of the institutional designation, which relates to the existing school, is maintained. And so, as I noted, these are carried forward and reflected in the secondary plan. Next slide, please. So the secondary plan then includes a number of, as I mentioned, general policies, and these are functional policies that apply specifically to Grimsby Beach. And these include, as I noted, the land use policies and the reference to those policies from the parent plan. But more importantly, they include some very specific policies that relate to managing change, the character areas, servicing and transportation, natural heritage, tree protection and enhancement, parks, open spaces and trails, cultural heritage, urban design, and then finally a specific section on implementation. And the section on change management is found at the very beginning of the secondary plan, and it's important to note that it clearly defines the area as an established area that is unique and well defined, and identifies that the type of change that's anticipated is to be limited to minor infill development that will consist of new units being provided on vacant lots. It may include lot severances, and it may include secondary suites, all of which must conform to the new character policies of the secondary plan. And in essence, the area is protected through the implementation of the draft infrastructure plan that identifies those minor improvements that are required. The next slide, please. So the main focus of the secondary plan for Grimsby Beach is the establishment, as has been referenced, of the character areas. And I would note that in the secondary plan, there are policies that refer to the Grimsby Beach character areas as a whole. And that section identifies some of the common characteristics throughout the area, and then goes into detail in relation to the core area, which is shown in blue, the green area or the south area, which is shown in green, and the northwest area, which is shown in the purple color. And these areas have been defined as a result of the background research and analysis, and also to reflect some of the common development patterns and built forms in each of these areas. And for each of these character areas, there is a clear description of the area that relates to the type of built form, its history, and its context. And each of these character areas then goes on to define policies related to land use, urban design, and cultural heritage, as well as implementation for those areas. Next slide, please. So the purple area of the northwest area, again, this is outlined in detail in the secondary plans, but this is an area, and as it's described in the secondary plan, that was created as part of the Grimsby Park New Survey, and this is dating from 1885. And this was an area that saw the construction of seasonal cottages on some of the lots, and the lots located to the west of the core area began to be developed through a grid pattern and a draft or a plan at that time that identified what is now 5th, 6th, 7th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th Street. And each of these streets uniquely terminates towards the lake. And in many cases, these lots have been consolidated to provide for some larger lots and redevelopment in the area. And as such, there's a reflection of land use policies that refer to those characteristics, as well as some of the urban design and cultural heritage policies and the implementing guidelines. Next slide, please. The core area, again, has a number of characteristics that are defined in the description, but I think it's very important to note that it is identified as one of the oldest and most significant established portions of Grimsby Beach. And this really dates back to its establishment as a Methodist campground in the 19th century. And a lot of the existing settlement area patterns that were developed and that were historic as a result of that campground have been retained and continue today. And the orientation and the size of the lots, as well as the circulation patterns to the road network, have very much been maintained and are reflective of some of that historic and rich history. The core areas themselves are easily discernible from some of the areas, and many of the cottages have unique and unifying characteristics with the wood frame construction, and as you can see here, have been intricately painted in very bright colors, and those are reflective of some of the unique characteristics and creativity of this area. Many of the existing landscape features, including the shoreline, the memorial cairn, the pillars, and Bell Park itself, have remained intact. And so the policies for this area very much identify the importance of those characteristics and a number of land use policies and urban design and cultural heritage policies that are intended to protect and enhance those areas. Next slide, please. And finally, the south area again. This area is unique again in its development and its history, and it contains many mature trees, including the designated tree stand, and also is reflective of the character of lots that were built east of Park Street North, which are somewhat different than that lotting fabric that exists in the core area and the Northwest. And again, for this area, there are specific land use policies, cultural heritage policies, and implementation policies. Next slide, please. So the secondary plan also includes a number of policies related to urban design and heritage. It references the importance of the town continuing to list and designate properties under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. These policies are also supported in the secondary plan by a set of new urban design and cultural heritage guidelines. As well, there's additional urban design policy direction that reflects the unique characteristics of Grimsby Beach. Next slide, please. The parks and open space policies. The parks and open space policies include the protection of the existing parks and areas, additional policies to address soil erosion and shoreline protection, and a number of policies that specifically speak to the development of a public realm master plan. And that is to address some of the areas around access to public areas and delineations, and to enhance access and connections throughout the area. Next slide, please. And I will just note that incorporated in that parks and open space is a specific set of policies that's related to tree protection and tree enhancement. And that includes the development of a tree management plan. In terms of servicing and transportation, the draft infrastructure plan that was created recommends policies that are required if for future development in terms of servicing requirements and how new development is to be provided, as well as some future development needs for stormwater improvements, and also includes some policies specific to those properties along the shoreline. The transportation policies reflect the existing transportation network and speak to the need for recommendations for improvements to signage, streets, and parking areas. The next slide, please. And finally, there's a section in the secondary plan that specifically speaks to implementation, and this identifies a number of requirements for development applications should they come forward in the area. It reflects the existing zoning and the requirements of that zoning, and speaks to the requirement for site plan approval, as well as lot creation, and reflects policies for existing vacant lots. The next slide, please. As was mentioned, through the secondary plan, there are references to directions for additional work and studies to be undertaken. And these are reflected here, including some additional analysis of storm sewers that is specifically in the Auditorium Circle area, erosion protection at the outfall, as I mentioned, the installation of new signage for streets and parking areas, the establishment of a deeming bylaw, and I'll speak to that in a moment, further assessment of the shoreline areas that were identified with some concerning conditions, and also the establishment of the public realm master plan. And specifically to the establishment of a deeming bylaw in essence, and this is outlined in the staff report, is a bylaw that can be adopted by council, which would recognize some of the original lots and deem them and merge them as one lot to better reflect the parcel fabric that exists within the area. And so that is something that staff have noted is to be further considered. Next slide, please. In terms of the draft zoning bylaw, the bylaw was developed again to ensure that it's reflected and implements the character areas and the updated policies that are now provided in the secondary plan. And I would note that in essence, the zoning does remain as it is today. The open space zones, there are no changes to those. That's the public open space zone that is on Bell Park. The convenience commercial zone for the small plaza at the intersection is maintained, as well as the hazard zone overlay. What has changed in relation to the Grimsby Beach zone is that the Grimsby Beach zone that currently applies to the whole area is in essence what is referenced as legacy zoning. And in essence, what that zoning provides for is that any development on a lot is to maintain all of the existing provisions from what is there today. So that would apply to the minimum lot area, the lot frontage, front, rear, and side yard setbacks. So in essence, establishing a footprint within which development can be replaced. Any development is also noted within the existing bylaw to allow for some increase from the floor area that exists up to 15%. And there are no changes proposed to those provisions within the existing zoning. There's also no change with respect to the current height provisions within the Grimsby Beach zoning. What has changed is the addition of a lot coverage provision, and that is to ensure that any vacant lots that are to be created will be captured and will be assessed on the basis of the new provision. The other change relates to the areas in essence to the northwest and south. And this is to introduce the Grimsby Beach 1 zone that is more reflective of those existing lot areas and frontages and provides for a set of provisions that will maintain and protect the character of that existing, the built form in those areas. Changes to the zoning, of course, can be applied for through the variance process, but in this case, those variances would now be under the test to maintain the intent and purpose of the new policies and the new provisions. The next slide, please. As was noted, one of the key implementation documents that has been provided to support the secondary plan and zoning bylaw is the draft urban design and heritage guidelines. And these have been carefully developed with input from the community and some recent revisions to reflect how development is to be guided both in the public realm and on private lands. And within the public realm, the guidelines express direction for things such as streetscapes, gateways, views, and trails, again, align with the new views and corridors and connections that are identified in the secondary plan. And the guidelines also speak to the importance of cultural heritage resources and conservation, and have a number of guiding policies that relate to design and architectural features. And one of the other elements that has been updated in these guidelines is, as has been conveyed through the community input, is the importance of some of the unique features that, while not necessarily recognized as cultural heritage resources, are certainly important and to be encouraged to reflect the unique characteristics of the design, as an example of the painted ladies. Next slide, please. So as was noted by Terry in her introduction in terms of the next steps for the secondary plan and zoning bylaw, it's anticipated from the comments and feedback this evening that additional assessment will be undertaken with consideration of additional revisions and changes to the secondary plan and zoning, and a recommendation report will come forward with a final draft of the secondary plan and the zoning bylaw for consideration by council. And again, there is a note to the link to the Let's Talk Grimsby page, which allows for continued input. And Ms. Danya Edwards' contact information is provided here as well. So, Mr. Mayor, thank you so much for the opportunity. I know that took a little while, but I think it's very important to set out the full context of the documents as part of the public meeting this evening.
You're welcome, Dana. Thank you very much for your presentation. Now we will open it up to members of the public. First up, we have John Allen, 6 Robinson Street North. Welcome, John.
Okay, yes, good evening, Jeff. One of the questions I had, parking is a problem down there. I'm wondering, as you proceed through the old gates off of Park Road, on your right there's a triangular shape of land there. I wonder if they could possibly pave that to some degree and put about maybe 10 parking spaces there for visitors to the area. It was part of a property that they took to put the service road right through, but and also on that same note, in the gate area, it would be nice to see the gates rebuilt to some degree. And another note I've made here, the outline of the area protected, it doesn't include the school at all, or any of the land between Park Road and Grand Avenue, which was the whole amusement park area. Should be protected, not protected, but somehow recognized that that was part of the original park.
Also tonight, we're learning new details about the hours of testimony by a former top aide to ex-White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. Our senior legal affairs correspondent Paula Reed is working the story for us. Paula, what have you learned about this latest witness?
Any comment? Oh, Bob's got his hand up.
Your presentation, staff and the consultant are taking your questions, and they will be answering them at the end of the delegations.
Okay, appreciate that. Possibly a little more obvious access stairways or something down to the beach itself from Victoria Terrace, because on the east end, down where the old septic thing used to be, it's just a handmade stairway there. That something a little more appropriate would be nice there. And some of these signs, like they've got one in Bell Park that gives you details about the heritage, and I think there's a couple others around too. A couple more of them would be quite nice, actually. Information signs.
John, are you finished, or do you have more questions or comments?
I think that was it pretty well.
All right. Well, Bob, I see your hands up. Is there something you wanted to say before your delegation? Freeze. Okay. Bob, I think you're muted. I can't see you. But...
There we go.
Okay.
I didn't have a comment necessarily just about John. I was just waiting in line. I don't know how you guys have queued up.
Yeah, it's queued up in order, and I'll read you out. So look to your name being called.
I'll put my hand down then.
Yes. All right. All right. Next up, we have David and Carolyn Webb, 31 Victoria Terrace. Welcome.
Can you hear me, Jeff? Okay. I don't really have all that much to say except for the trees that need tremendous trimming on the Victoria Terrace. There's trees that are growing at a 45-degree angle, waiting to fall on somebody. And I don't just mean one or two, I mean a lot. And that's about all I've got to add.
All right. Thank you very much, David. Up next, we have Ross Doyle, 1 Victoria Terrace. Good evening, Ross.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello. Okay. The concern I have is that we seem to have a policy of letting these old rotten trees stay up, which is fine, except when they overhang people's houses. Now, the real question I have, has the city talked to their insurer to see if they have insurance for, if they make policy of letting these rotten trees stand till they fall down, which is up till now has just been bad maintenance. But if it becomes policy, is there going to be insurance to cover this? And that's all I have to say.
Patterson, 33 Victoria Terrace. To June Robertson, 396 Park Road North. Welcome, June.
Good evening, thank you. I think, in fact, Dana referred to one of my concerns that I'd written in about, and it was the repeated reference to charm and character, and not clearly defining what that was. Especially in the discussions that I had listened to. But right at the end of Dana's presentation, she referred to the painted ladies. And that was, for me, what designates or is the charm in our area. And I think not being more specific left me with the big question of who's to be our arbiter of taste. Who will make the decision that this thing is charming and that thing isn't? But if there's going to be a bit more definition, and you also mentioned, Dana, that the section of the report that's entitled Character Areas will have more detail in that. So that goes a long way to addressing my concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, June. Now we move to Ian Robertson, 396 Park Road North.
Good evening, thank you. I would just like to add that it seems to me your drawings show that at the corner of Wesley Avenue and Fair Avenue, there is some form of footpath through to the Auditorium Circle. I just wondered if that is included in the plan as one of your avenues or view lines, because right now it is being used as a private parking lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Up next, we have Vinod Baga, 40 Inglewood Court. Welcome, Vinod. I don't see Vinod. Now we'll move to Bob Friesen, 41 Victoria Terrace. Welcome, Bob.
Well, I've got lots to say.
All right.
I've got 5 points. They're all about the core area because that's where I live. And the very first one is it's in the staff planning report. And there's a statement there that requires the submission of a heritage impact assessment for applications submitted under the Planning Act within the core area at the discretion of staff. And I would like to see that phrase "at the discretion of staff" struck from that directive, because it should not be left up to any one person to decide what is heritage or not. It kind of goes along with what June's comment was before. If the intent to preserve the community, it's important that we make every new construction complete a heritage impact assessment and do not leave it up to any one person. That's my first point. My second point has to do with the size of new builds or replacements. And I'd like the reduction of building height to go from 9 meters, which is the height of the tallest building in Grimsby Beach, to 6.5, which is the average height of heritage buildings in our area. A decade ago, the planning department at the time approved a minor variance for a home on 3rd Street. And the property's owners designed and built a beautiful home that's in the shape and style of other Victoria cottages adjacent to them. However, the minor variance allowed for an increase of height and lot coverage, and now the home looms over the surrounding homes. The planning department of the time and the property owners did not understand that proportion, symmetry, and unity are also important elements of design. The beauty of the painted ladies, since they've already been mentioned, just up the street. It's not just the whimsical gingerbread and the color design. It also lies in the fact that there's unity in their size and shape. As different as they are decorated, they look like they belong together. And that is part of the charm of Grimsby Beach. My fear is that the secondary plan allows property owners and town staff to repeat the mistake of allowing homes that are out of proportion in height and lot coverage. The large home on 3rd Street should never be used as a precedent, and applying a firm height for new builds will eliminate that possibility. Lot coverage is a more difficult thing to manage. There's so much diversity here in the core area that it's wiser to look at each property, what the standard is surrounding it, and make allowances that are compatible with the neighboring homes. This should be done with great care so as not to repeat the mistake that was made 10 years ago. My third point is about residential parking. I would like a minimum of 2 parking spaces on any infill sites and additional parking required on residential property where secondary suites are added. Infill and adding secondary suites are going to add pressure to the few available parking spaces in the core area. Several homes cover nearly all of their lot, which means homeowners need to park their cars on municipal lots, on the street, and on makeshift lanes. The ratio of cars to houses on my street is currently 2.17. I went out and counted and measured it. So even if you hold the minimum parking at 2 cars per property on new builds, there's still going to be more cars scrambling for a place to rest. My fourth point is about visitor parking. I want signage directing visitors to park at the community hall on Grand Avenue. I heard John Allen's proposal about Phelps Gate, and I would oppose that because there's some significant trees on that little triangle of land. And since there's already a parking lot at the community hall, I would propose that visitors coming to our area use that instead. My fifth point is about a tree plan. And I certainly acknowledge the other concerns that I've heard from my neighbors about risk management. There are some very, very large trees, some very large, heavy limbs up there. And I certainly they need to be pruned regularly. I know that the town does a tree survey every 3 years, and they do go into parks and trim. They just did Bell Park this last week. But nevertheless, we've lost 12 mature trees in the last 9 months because they had to be cut down. A lot of them were ash trees. If our tree canopy is going to continue to be a defining characteristic in a neighborhood, we need to develop a tree plan, and it needs to be implemented as soon as possible. 800 respondents responded to the very first survey and rated mature trees as one of the most important features of Grimsby Beach. So this is something that is a concern, not just for residents, but for people who live outside of our community. Care and maintenance of trees in parks and on private lands should require the cooperation of town staff and residents. The Parks and Recreation and Culture official plan states that the town needs to encourage the involvement of residents in caring for their community. I see the initiative of a tree plan a perfect opportunity to do this, because it has become clear that the efforts and resources of town staff have not been enough to preserve our canopy. In closing, I've been a resident here for 34 years, and over that time, I've come to appreciate historical and natural heritage. And I appreciate that the town has invested in this study and developed a secondary plan. But in my view, there are some changes that are required if it's going to accomplish what it sets out to do, that is to preserve and protect the natural and historical heritage of Grimsby Beach for the generations to come. And those are my 5 points, and that's all I have to say.
Policeman, 10 Betts Ave. Welcome, Darren.
Hello. We have the comments we have are in regards to the Grimsby Beach area, and it was mentioned earlier that the bylaws propose were reflecting the development in the area. So Grimsby Beach, you're proposing a 25% lot coverage in the draft secondary plan, which does not reflect the majority of the places in the Grimsby Beach zone. So our comment would be that we believe that lot coverage should be at least 50%, which would be more reflective of what is currently there. And GB1, which is an area with bigger lots, you did increase the lot coverage from 25 to 30 in the latest amendment. That area actually has larger lots than the actual GB area. So I think we believe 50% is probably more reflective of what's there. The sewer, I don't believe any upgrades to the sewer have been proposed. I believe the Grimsby's department has said that the sewers in the area are kind of a hodgepodge of sewer lines, and it has not been reflected that any of that will be changed from what I can see. So we're wondering if the sewer upgrades are something that's going to be considered. So those were the two points. We've written in another point regarding a current lot that is a separate lot that we would like to see the boundaries shown on the current Grimsby Beach plan. Those are the three items that we had.
All right, thank you, Darren. Up next, Louisa Mcalpine, 38 Auditorium Circle. Welcome, Louisa.
Sorry. Yeah, just to add a couple of points. Number one, the visitor parking. Parking is a huge issue. And the tourists, although it's great that they're admiring our heritage homes, can be quite invasive, especially when you're living in the core area. So the visitors need parking, and they are parking in our own personal driveways and blocking our driveways. And so also in conjunction with that, there needs to be better signage so that the visitors can admire from afar. I know we've got some small signs out here, but people are not listening and can be quite disrespectful over a personal property, taking pictures right in they think it's a museum. They don't know that we live here. So there really needs to be, even in the whatever we're putting out for the Grimsby tourism thing or whatever, I know it's going to happen, but that people have to know that these are private homes and they're not museums, and people can get quite invasive. And just one last point about the trees, the maintenance of the trees. Really important too. You know, we're all there's encroachment upon encroachment from this area. You know, that's how it's always been all these years, and it's really unclear whose tree is on whose property. Is it on your neighbor's property? Is it on the town's property or whatever? So it would be great if the town would support looking at all trees on whoever's property they are in this area to maintain them at their healthiest spot and safest. Thanks.
Thank you, Louisa. Up next, we have Adam Modersed, 26 Red Haven Drive. Welcome, Adam.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just give me a second here. I just want to speak about a technical matter, but it's really fundamental to the whole study and the secondary plan, and it's the role of the historic plans of subdivision and the deeming bylaw. At the open house, I asked a question as to what due diligence was carried out to determine the validity of the older Grimsby Beach lot plans. The answer that was provided was that just because there's been previous deeming bylaws, they removed the lots from the plan of subdivision. So it really raises the question, how can a deeming bylaw be proposed if the validation of the original plans has never occurred? And some of the quotes from the consultant on the deeming bylaw were, quote, the deeming bylaw would establish those older tent lots. My comment is, this is an assumption not based on research of what the legal lot fabric currently is. On the validity of the older lot plans, consultant said, quote, I will say that it is certainly something we have not pursued further. It was not part of the scope of the study. It is something we recommended. And my comment to that is, what this plan needed from the beginning was a determination of legal fact, not opinion on the validity of the old historic plans, if there is any. How can policies and objectives of the secondary plan be fulfilled if there was not a simple determination of the underlying facts? In my opinion, the cart was clearly put before the horse. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation, Adam. That concludes the presentations from the public. Council, do you have any questions or comments? Councillor Bothwell.
Thank you, Mayor Jordan. Just a quick one to the consultant. I had raised this at a previous public meeting as well. I asked about the vistas from the lake, and I didn't mean on Victoria Terrace looking to the lake. I meant because of the heritage nature of the ships coming into the pier and the many people who use the beach and use the existing pier, there was a visual vista from ships arriving on Lake Ontario, approaching Victoria Terrace. And that vista, as you approach from Lake Ontario, looking at Victoria Terrace and the green space and the trees and the pathway that goes up from the pier to the 3rd Avenue, I think it was, whatever, is critical, I think, to be maintained as well. So when we talk about setbacks and vistas, I think that protecting from any further development or change to the vista as it appeared as you approached is a significant heritage feature. So I just wondered, I didn't see that all addressed in any of the reports. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bothwell. Councillor Frick.
Thank you, Mayor Jordan. I just made a few notes. I just want to make a comment more than anything else, and reach out to our staff and the committee that's doing the study down at Grimsby Beach. I hear the same comments and same concerns over and over and over. This particular study has been going on for quite a long time, and listening to everyone tonight, I boil it down to about 4 or 5 things. And I think the residents have yet to be given an answer to the solution to most of these things. For example, the trees and the tree canopy and a program to manage trees. We keep talking about it, we hear about it all the time, but I haven't heard any solution to it yet. And it's been a long time coming, and we need to get those answers. Parking and no parking. There's been a lot of discussion around that. There's concern about parking in the wrong places. There's a concern about not enough parking. And we still don't have, any kind of a plan to address that yet. So that needs to be addressed because it keeps coming up all the time. The size and character of new builds, and just the whole character of any new buildings that are going into the area. We still don't have anything clarified on that. The Heritage Conservation District study, of course, was turned down by council, but we need to get back to looking at that again. And then there's the protection, just the overall protection of the heritage sites and the heritage buildings and houses. And one thing I didn't hear too much about was shoreline protection, which I think is another issue. And I think Mr. Friesen was one of the captains of that particular movement. So I think all of those items need to be addressed because they keep coming up, and we've been talking about them and commenting on them for such a long, long time now. And I just hope that staff and the committee that's studying the area come up with some answers soon, because we're going into a new year and into an election soon. So hopefully we'll get some of these things resolved before then. So I just wanted to throw that out there. So we really boiled this down to about 6 different items. And I just think we just need to address them and clear them up and get everybody informed as to what we're going to do. I don't need any answers from anybody, but that's just my comments. If the consultants want to comment on any of those things, that's fine too. Thanks, Mayor Jordan.
Questions or comments from council? Walter Basic, Assistant Director of Planning, will answer the questions and comments with help from Dana and Terry. Go ahead, Walter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll defer to Dana and Terry to answer the questions.
Thank you, Walter, and thank you everyone for those questions. And maybe I'm going to start in a bit of a reverse order, and I do want to address some of the comments and concerns raised by Councillor Frake through you, Mr. Mayor. Definitely, the issue of trees and parking were raised throughout the study, and you'll note that one of the things that is identified within the secondary plan itself is actually direction for those things to be completed in terms of the tree management plan. And in relation to parking, there is a direction for additional signage and the areas of parking. And this came up with a few of from a lot of the comments this evening. There is the direction for the public realm master plan to be done. And it's through that plan. There's also guidance on this in the heritage and urban design guidelines to identify appropriate locations for the potential for those areas or changes to those areas, including additional signage. So those are areas, and I do understand that this is, a land use study. So in terms of addressing those things, our tools are really limited to those under the Planning Act for land use and regulations. But as I mentioned, those things are very important. They have continued to be identified, and we've actually incorporated them into the policies, which means that if council should choose to adopt the official plan amendment, it is the direction of council for those things to be done. So that gives the added emphasis to directing staff to do those without a separate direction, providing for the necessary resources and allocating that through the budget process. So it's important that they're in the secondary plan for that reason. You did note, Councillor Frake, the Heritage Conservation District, and I know we've heard throughout the study about that as a tool. And it's my opinion that the Heritage Conservation District plan, should it be continued to be pursued, which it definitely can, there's nothing in what we're providing that precludes that. In fact, what we've presented in this secondary plan actually helps to frame that. And there's many studies I've been involved with that prepare the area plan. It might be a secondary plan or a plan for a downtown, and then following suit is the heritage. Oh, sorry, I just lost something here. Can you still hear me? Heritage Conservation District plan. The shoreline protection matter that you referred to, again, this is one of those elements that is incorporated into the directions. And the consultants did identify some areas that did and should require some further consideration. And I know Mr. Friesen has also raised that as an issue. So again, that's incorporated into those areas. The issue of new builds, I think, is really key to what we need to do here in terms of looking at what is appropriate. And I was listening to some of the comments, and there are multiple areas that we've set out in the policies themselves and the guidelines that specifically speak to how to manage those new builds. And I'll refer to a couple of those, but I hope that responds to, I certainly know that those are concerns that you have raised, Councillor, and that we have continued to highlight. And I don't know if staff wanted to speak to any of those.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dana. And through the mayor, some of these things are things that the planning department does not do. A lot of them are operational in nature. So some of them might include a new policy that has to be developed or furthered or something like that. Or it might involve just ongoing maintenance of some of those things. So we've been reaching out to our Parks and Recs department, our Public Works department on some of these issues to see how they can be furthered, to make sure that we're addressing those issues, because we have definitely heard them and want to try to work with our corporate partners to really find an answer. But some of them are not things that we do on a day-to-day basis. So that we are working with some of our partners to try and get some of those answers, to try to find out some solutions. And we have definitely reached out to some of our legal counsel as well with regard to the deeming bylaw and some of those other questions to make sure that we are addressing issues that are not specifically planning in nature, and that would be specifically within the secondary plan or draft bylaw, but are definitely things that have been raised by the community. So there's a lot of various questions that we are raising with our various partners to try to find some answers so that we can provide answers to the community as well.
Thank you for that answer. Well, the items that are, as you say, operational, that, which are easy, low-hanging fruit for us to address, I guess, for example, trees, a tree management program. I mean, we should address these and take them out of these discussions altogether. I mean, we have tree management programs now all over Grimsby, in different areas of Grimsby. So why don't we just take something like that, address it, and get it off the table, because it keeps coming up all of the time. And there's a love of trees in Grimsby. So, and we want to address, especially down in that area where trees are disappearing all the time, and there's more that probably need to be taken out. So that is an easy one because it's operational, as you say. So let's deal with those ones, those types of items, and parking, for example, is another one, which is probably an operational public works issue. So why don't we get those things done and get them out of this particular forum and move on with all the more important core things that need to be addressed. So I know I'm preaching to the converted here. So, yeah. So I'm just making a comment, so I don't need you to respond to it, but I'm just suggesting that we do those things, and we can eliminate half of these conversations that we have at most of these meetings. So anyways, thank you very much. I just wanted to say that. Thanks.
Yes, thank you.
Bob, I see you have your hand up.
I just want to make a comment about Reg's last comment about taking a tree plan out. I'm not in favor of that at all, since that the large mature trees in Grimsby Beach is a defining characteristic. And I think that's why it has to be part of this heritage study. It's part of the natural heritage, maybe not the historical, well, historical too, but natural heritage, and it needs to be treated as such. And I think that's the reason why it has to be part of this particular plan. What I don't want to see is that a department in the town comes in and starts managing the trees without considering what they add to the community. Thank you.
If I can, I just want to answer that. Definitely, Bob, we definitely want the policy. There's a policy component that we have to have and we want to have in the secondary plan. But there's other types of policies that have to be looked at with our Parks and Rec department, as well as our Public Works department. And we've had some initial conversations with them. There's various, so if there's a new policy that has to be adopted, or if there's a new program, there's various inputs that have to be looked at for that. So it's not that we would take it out, but it's just some of those have to be furthered with some of our operational departments. So that's where I was talking about that we'd be working with some of them to try to see some of those answers to those questions for you.
And I was going to, only add, Your Worship, that through a lot of the coordination with some of the work that was done with the community, including with Mr. Friesen, that there's quite a lot of good stuff in the tree strategy. It's reflective of, albeit not 100%, pretty significant start on the tree inventory, and it identifies some very specific tree management plan practices, and that's not just in relation to tree protection, but for tree enhancement and plantings. And so building on that, I think as part of a tree management plan, I 100% agree, should be something that is started with the approval of or the consideration of the secondary plan.
Go ahead.
Your Worship, I see Councillor Bothwell's hand is raised, and I was actually going to address her issue as well.
All right, go ahead.
I'll wait. Councillor Bothwell, through you, Mr. Mayor, you noted the updates to the visual vista and the connections and the views that you did provide at the last meeting. And I apologize for not providing that that schedule, but it has been updated. And it is inclusive of views, not just from the shoreline, but coming in to the shoreline. And so that's reflected in the updated schedule. And that was also added to some of the public space areas. So there is additional connections, additional view corridors and vistas that have been added to the official plan schedule.
Thank you, Mayor. Can I just add one quick question?
Yes, go ahead, Councillor Bothwell.
Thank you, Dana, for that. And I'll look for that information and check it out. Just again, to go to the trees is a real big thing in the tree canopy. There is a butternut tree that's a protected species in the Grimsby Beach area that's deemed to be somewhere around 200, 300 years old. We call it the Grand Poobah butternut, whatever. And it might be like one of the last living ones of its age or whatever. We're just trying to now determine whether or not it's actually a native butternut or not a hybrid. And that process is being undertaken right now. But I think, again, that just again reflects the significance of the mature vegetation in the trees in that area and the protection that's needed. This one is right on a property that's was sold or close to being sold and potentially redeveloped. So I think it's just really critical that, and I don't know how you can do this, but whether or not, this is part of like an HCD, is the tree, we need to designate a tree. Like if that tree is a rare butternut that's unique to the Grimsby Beach area, we like similar to what we did with the Grand Avenue tree stand and the Burgess tree, we need to designate those trees and protect them. So I just want to make sure that that's captured as well in the reports, that the significance of those trees. Thank you. And that butternut particularly. Thank you.
Your Worship, I was going to just sort of go through and then go back, I guess, to any further questions, but some of the comments and questions just in response, if that's
go ahead, Dana.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Allen did raise a number of issues with respect to parking in terms of the potential location for new parking areas. And I did want to note that is something that has been identified as we've just been discussing the importance of that and addressing some of the parking issues, again, a bit outside of some of the policy work, but certainly operationally something that as staff noted they're going to address. And that would include, as was noted, the additional signage. We've recognized, I think, through the transportation work that was done, not only additional signage for transportation purposes, but also directing people to different areas and to help control some of the influx of tourists that come into the area. I know, I believe the Webbs noted concerns about trees as well, and we heard about the importance of getting a tree management program in place that would deal with managing existing trees. And I think Mr. Doyle noted that as well in terms of concerns about some of the damaged trees and the potential for some of those trees coming down. Ms. Robertson identified, and again, I hope that we have captured the distinctive characteristics, the charm and character of the Painted Ladies and other key sort of creative features that make Grimsby Beach unique. We have amended the guidelines to reflect that, and we certainly will go and look at the character area descriptions. I believe they are captured, but we will revisit that to ensure that distinctive language is also provided. Mr. Robertson spoke again to, I think it was the footpath within the Auditorium Circle. And I did want to note that that area again has also been added in terms of the connections into and out of that area in terms of the view and the vistas there. That particular area is not just looking out from that area, but looking in, so that hopefully that addresses that concern. Mr. Friesen raised a number of issues, including the trees that we have discussed. And again, the tree strategy sets out some base information specific to Grimsby Beach, I think in terms of the inventory and some of the potential policies for that type of a plan and program that can be built upon. He also referred to some specific questions around the policies, in particular the heritage impact assessment and the need to remove the at discretion of staff. We can certainly look at that. I know staff may have some points on that. I think the importance of requiring a heritage impact assessment is to ensure that if someone, for instance, is making a subtle change, that a full heritage impact assessment is not required. And it's really to give some discretion based on the scope and the type of change that's being proposed. But we'll certainly go back and take a look at that particular language that Mr. Friesen raised a concern with. In terms of the heights and the idea of the average heights and reducing the heights to ensure that there's appropriate height provisions. In terms of the variation in heights, I think what we've tried to ensure with the character area policies, as well as the zoning bylaw, is that any change that's being implemented to height other than what is in existence is addressed through the various policies that speak to prevailing heights and speak to compatibility with the immediate area, adjacent areas. So a site that may have lower heights in context would have to address that. And I would say that also applies to coverage. The 25% is actually intended to apply to vacant lots. So someone replicating development that might be unique to a particular lot that's greater than that would be in a position to be able to provide for that building footprint based on the existing home building footprint that's being replaced. So that coverage would be set. The parking provisions for the bylaw are not being adjusted. So anyone introducing a secondary suite or requiring or putting replacement housing in place would be subject to those provisions of the bylaw. And anyone seeking to reduce those would be subject to an approval process. I know that I think it was Darren raised the issue about the 25% and the 30% and is seeking the 50%. I know that's an item that's been noted that we've looked at. I apologize if I referenced in terms of the infrastructure improvements to sewer. My reference should have been just stormwater management, and that's reflected in the infrastructure plan policies. Louisa spoke to the importance of visitor parking and the trees, and as noted, those are the two issues that have been raised to be proceeded with as quickly as possible. And then there were a number of comments about parcel fabric and deeming bylaws, and I would like to clarify that our initial background report did identify the use of deeming bylaws to date for a number of lots within the historic plans in this area. So it is something that has been utilized in the Grimsby Beach area, and there's a full chart identifying all of those deeming bylaws and the various properties which have been affected by those. And if I stated, as was quoted, that a deeming bylaw would not establish the tent lots, I think that might be misplaced, because the intention is that the tent lots are established through those historic plans, and the deeming bylaw would reflect the consolidation of those into the new lots. So depending on how the deeming bylaw is utilized, I don't think by any means I'm suggesting that we're invalidating anything at this stage through the policies and the provisions. We've noted it as something to be considered. We noted the historic use of it, and we've noted that it may be something that needs to be addressed further based on the historic plans. So I think the facts are there. They have been assessed. The analysis has been done. It's really with staff to further look at that with legal to determine the appropriate approach. So I think that's covered most of the comments, and there are a number of areas that we will come back to, and perhaps Terry would want to add anything further.
Can I mention something? This is Darren. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you go ahead, Darren. I'll let you do that. I'll use my discretion to allow you to say something and defer slightly from the agenda. Go ahead, Darren.
Oh, sorry, I didn't know what the agenda was, but it was just regarding my comments. I'm not sure who was speaking there, but they just kind of stated what my comments were. I just kind of wanted an answer on, how they came up with the 25%, because in my opinion, where the lots are smaller, why is the lot coverage a smaller amount? It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't seem like good planning to me.
All right, thank you. Dana?
Yeah, through your worship. Yes, the 25% was established as a benchmark upon which, an amendment or revision would be required, depending, of course, on the need for a certain type size of home on the lot, recognizing that some of the smaller lots may warrant an increase. And given, again, the policies and requirements that talk about the adjacent areas and in context, it may very well be suitable to be at a higher amount, but it would require that check and that process. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah.
And sorry, it is only applicable to vacant lots.
Thank you. Go ahead, John. John, I don't know if you're speaking, but you are muted if you are.
Yeah. Okay. You hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah. Just my concern to Bob Friesen's comment about my suggested parking lot. Definitely wouldn't want to remove any trees. It would reduce the amount of number of spots for sure, but even if you could create a few spots in there would certainly help out. And I just had a thought. I know it's not in the town's budget, but Roy Cook's property for sale. Just buy that and make a big parking lot out of it. You solve everything. On that, I'll get off.
All right. Thanks, John. In a perfect world. Dana, do you have any other comments?
I know, thank you, Your Worship. I'll defer to staff for any additional comments, but I just wanted to say thank you to those who provided comments. And we certainly will be working with staff through the next steps in the process and continue to look for feedback and input as we move forward. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you as well. Oh, Terry, go ahead.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. There was also a number of written comments that we received prior to the public meeting. There were some questions about right of access. And again, that might be a policy that would be considered. There'll be some further discussion on that in future reports that we would provide to council. Some questions about some of the features within the parklands, such as washrooms. Again, that would be considered through some the park master plan. Sorry, I'm just going through the list of various questions that we received. And just some of the other ones, we definitely in the next in the recommendation report, we will be having all of the comments we received, and we're asking for comments by February 7th. So all of the comments will be considered on this. So we will provide answers and some additional information on each of the comments we receive in the information report and the recommendation report for that. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Terry. And seeing no further questions or comments, thank you everyone for your participation in this public meeting. And the consultants and staff will take back your feedback. Please provide additional comments by February 7th. Please contact staff at planning@grimsby.ca if you have any additional comments or questions about the proposal after this meeting. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening. Meeting is adjourned. Good night.
Thank you.